Before we get started, I just wanted to let you know that I discuss allegations of rape in this episode, so it should be mentioned first.
Just so you know, this show is about scary stuff, so don't say I didn't warn you guys. And remember, don't be scared.
Episode 71. Shortcut. War Baby here with another episode of Murderous Minors. For as long as there's been people, there's been bullying, although that term has only recently become widespread. As a kid in the 80s, it was more likely that you'd hear that a child was being picked on, leading one to imagine toilet swirlies or the victim being rescued from a locker like in the movies. Nowadays, stories about bullying often center around suicide, child after child who had taken their own life rather than live another torturous day as it was. Or the bullied kid takes revenge and the media is instead covering a school shooting or some other kind of spontaneous violent event. It's not often that a bullied child is a murder victim and the killer's not the bully. However, in 1985, Pleasanton, California, the murder of 14-year-old Foothill High freshman Tina Faelz fit just that scenario. The secondary tragedy here is that the case took decades and decades to reach its conclusion, dragging out the fear in the community, along with the pain and suffering of Tina's family and friends. This week on Murderous Minors, for the first time, we cover a cold case in which DNA would eventually point directly to the killer of Tina Faelz. She was born in April of 1969, Tina Marie Faelz, daughter of Shirley Griffith and Ron Faelz, who had married in San Francisco the year before, then returned to his home state of Washington. Ron was a young hippie. He partied too much and was not a good father. He admitted as much to Joshua Suchon, author of Murder in Pleasanton, our main source for this episode. The pair separated around Tina's first birthday and divorced 2 years later. Shirley returned to her hometown outside San Francisco, little Tina in tow, and soon began dating former crush Steve Faelz. Steve legally adopted his stepdaughter after he and Shirley got married, so in 1973, Tina Faelz became Tina Faelz. The couple had a son a few years later, then settled onto Virgin Islands Court in the Valley Trails neighborhood to raise their family. Steve was a fireman and Shirley worked nearby at the 7-Eleven, jobs which made them recognizable to most everyone around. The kids played soccer and Tina was a Girl Scout. Their childhood was mostly idyllic for a decade or so, until Steve had an affair with Shirley's brother's wife. Both couples divorced and the two married each other. The cousins were now their step-siblings as well. The implosion of these families did not fare well for those left behind, and Shirley Faelz had a difficult time adjusting to being a single mother. After work, she could often be found at local bar The Poppy Lounge. The years following the divorce were different than before, but Tina continued to be an active, outdoorsy girl who loved climbing trees and exploring the town on her bicycle. She developed a love of pranks as an adolescent, like crank calling strangers and ding-dong ditching people's homes. For all the neighborhood kids that found Tina hilarious, there were about the same amount that didn't appreciate or relate to her sense of humor. Some found her silliness irritating, and Tina found herself developing enemies throughout adolescence and into her teenage years. Tina's mother had a difficult time supporting her family on her gas station clerk wages, and soon sectioned off a family room to rent to boarders. Not only that, but she began dating a known drug user with whom Tina developed a suspicious relationship, even telling friends sometimes that she herself was in love with him. It was noticed that he had spent some time unsupervised inside Tina's bedroom with her, but the allegations were never substantiated. He ended up moving out though, and Shirley still dated him. As she became a teenager, Tina was rebellious and a bit wild at home and with friends. Many classmates saw her as a smartass, but that seemed to be a byproduct of her awkward attempts to make them laugh. Her true friends saw it more as attention-seeking behavior that didn't have the desired result. After a while, she just kind of existed on the outskirts of her peers. Her real friends knew her to be extremely funny, and she was always cracking them up and making a joke out of anything and everything. But as they say, in the tears of a clown. There were tons of kids in the neighborhood, and Tina even tried switching bus stops to avoid being harassed and ultimately gave up riding it completely. Foothill High School was almost 5 miles from her house, but wise kids who'd come before had discovered a shortcut that shaved several miles from the trek. Fellow Foothill freshman Stephen Carlson lived in the house closest to the mouth of the shortcut that exited by the high school. His family had lived there since he was in the 7th grade, and he had an older sister and a younger brother and sister who were twins. He and Tina Faelz were both freshmen at Foothill High in 1984, although they didn't hang out, likely because he was 16 years old to her 14. As a youngster, Steve Carlson exhibited signs of what some family would later assume to be ADHD. He was a hyper child, they said, always finding trouble no matter what the circumstance or environment. As a teen, his friends recalled a handsome blonde boy with blue eyes, who ran around with his equally handsome brother, who, along with his twin sister, were 2 years younger. Honestly, if there was ever a bad seed in a family, Steve would be it. Many of the boys just hung around and played sports in their free time, and Steve participated, though he had little talent for it. Not only was he not athletically inclined, but he also just liked to make trouble. The hyper youngster was still in there, and he did things like sabotage his friends' fun and basically mess around when everyone else was trying to have an honest good time. And he didn't even give a shit. He was the guy who would make a crude, off-putting comment in the middle of a very normal situation and make the hairs on your arms stand up. The nickname Creepy Carlson just fit. He lacked the typical social graces of a teen his age and was clearly behind in maturity. The other kids messed with him, but it seemed he brought it upon himself sometimes, as he had that habit of blurting out inappropriate things whenever the mood struck him. His behavioral issues and outbursts began to manifest themselves in a sexual manner in junior high school, such as when he allegedly ran naked around the backyard pool chasing after one of his younger sister's friends. And the allegations grow more disturbing. Steve Carlson's older sister asserted that she once caught him hiding in her bedroom after she showered and that he observed her fully unclothed. To make matters more unsettling, their younger sister would later in life accuse him of molesting her in their youth. Those sensitive allegations remain unanswered as far as I can tell, and the twins ultimately had rocky teen years themselves. It was sort of common knowledge in the family that most of the Carlson kids were accidents. Steve's oldest sister says in the book that as the younger kids aged, their parents shed their parental duties one by one over time. The house was messy and pets ran amok. The Carlsons hung out at the Poppy Lounge too, where Tina's mother was a regular, though they weren't known to associate. The siblings partied often in the house on Lemonwood Way while their parents had their weekly night out, even stealing amphetamines prescribed to their mother for weight loss to get a quick high. Steve Carlson was smoking marijuana, drinking alcohol, and abusing meth in the form of cheap crank during freshman year. He also stumbled through a brief, uninspired stint on the football team. Still unathletic at best, he did, however, enjoy the brutality and aggression of the sport. His participation was more of a meager attempt at being normal, at being one of the so-called guys. You know, the kind of guy that didn't creep girls out, which he was currently, no matter how handsome. He was known to throw fists, not only at school but also when partying. His former woodshop teacher recalled breaking up a brutal fistfight in the halls. From what we know, I think we can safely call him a hothead. As a 16-year-old ninth grader, Steve had an encounter with a neighbor that she described as attempted rape. Luckily, her sister arrived home from school and pummeled him until he ran off. He had followed her home from school and attacked the girl in the courtyard in front of her own home. Later on that school year, an acquaintance described Steve as trying to force himself on her while she was hanging out at their house. But it's another allegation that could ultimately have been a reason to kill. Over at Tina's house, she was busy helping raise her brother, often watching him while their mother was out. Their parents battled over custody relentlessly, with the dad wanting equal time, not just 2 weekends a month and 2 weeks in the summer. Steve knew that Shirley was not adjusting well at all and was working multiple jobs, leaving the kids at home alone with whomever was renting the extra bedrooms. This didn't sit well with him, but his requests were continuously denied, regardless of his seeming stability. The bus, a place of frequent torment for Tina. Due to continual harassment from other kids, she began to forego the bus, opting instead to take that shortcut, and her parents hated it. Her dad tried to get her to drop her bus boycott, concerned for her safety through the partially obscured labyrinthine path she preferred. The trek, part of which was a giant concrete tube running beneath Interstate 680, would often make her late, for which she'd receive detention and need to stay even later. The shortcut, termed the Creek by local kids, contained a brushy downslope leading to, well, a creek, widely known to be where older kids went to do the things that teenagers do. The Carlson home was close enough that Steve could see the creek from his bedroom, as their home was in close proximity to Foothill High School grounds. Across the street from the high school lived a classmate of Tina's, referred to in the book as Jane Doe. Through letters sent to the author, she described a series of events not made public for decades, and only uttered for the purpose of the book through a shroud of anonymity. She said that Steve Carlson first raped her when they were in junior high school, after picking on her in class throughout the year. He got her alone in a secluded spot at lunchtime on campus. She asserts that the abuse continued, coupled with sexual abuse she was already enduring within her home. The combination only steeled her resolve to stay quiet, but in time, she recounted to the author that Steve began to wait in her empty house to rape her. He terrorized her with threats of spreading rumors about her if she told anyone about the abuse or resisted it. Trouble began after Tina noticed something was up and tried to come hang out, but her friend declined. Jane told her that someone bad was at her house, which just made Tina more determined to try and keep her friend safe. She recalled that Steve was already trying to get into her home by this point, and they eventually let him in, but only after threatening him wildly with a knife. He came on to her. He tried to get Tina to mess around with them, but she quickly got the heck out of there. And she was uneasy, but it